I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, to be really precise about the question about what philosophy is all about, it really, all as you put out the definition, like love for wisdom,
Mhm.
it's more than that. I mean, sometimes you wonder, like, are we guided by some unknown philosophy, and then uh, I mean, like, everybody, those ignorant peasants, pretty thought they were not knowing about the ways of life.
Yeah.
Are they also guided by some kind of, wisdom which is unknown to them, and then which is probably they've not understood it, but yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I feel like. It's more than like love. It's not just simply love; it's life with the wisdom. Like, you live. So yeah, I now request all my other colleagues too to interact with it. And before they can ask, I have my own personal question to you,
Mhm.
Professor Helton. Like, why do you think, like, suddenly there is this eruption of these number of the spurting of questions from Pythagoras to Socrates to Plato? Why all of a sudden? But is there a change in the culture or some such thing at that time period, some 2,500 years back? Has anything happened in the society that led to this kind of questioning, and then, of course, the birth of philosophy?
Mhm. Good, thanks. A couple of things just come to mind here, and maybe just kind of back up. One thing that you'd mentioned sort of earlier, and I think about this a lot, especially with my students, and it kind of goes back to I remember when I had to take French, and Molière wrote this play called The Bourgeois Gentleman. Maybe you've heard of it, in which the character Monsieur Jourdain he wants to impress a new young lady, a beloved, and so he wants to write her a poem or a letter or something, and so he wants to learn, as he says, sort of highfalutin prose. So he spends all this money and hires a teacher, and the teacher takes the money, and at the end, Monsieur Jourdain sort of suddenly realizes, well, I hired you to teach me prose, but I've been speaking prose all the time and writing it all the time. Sort of recognize what he's already done all the time. And in some ways, and you alluded to this, I think philosophy in a way is like that, right? There's a sense in which sort of all of us have ideas, we have values, we sort of pick them up almost like the air we breathe from our family, from our culture, and there's sort of so much part of us that we don't think about them. We just sort of act on them. And so I think what the ancients kind of are telling us, okay, is that kind of philosophy is to sort of wake us from that dogmatic slumber, right? I mean, Socrates is just trying to sort of get us to sort of we already sort of have we already sort of have a philosophy, but it's time to kind of do it, right? To take those ideas and values we have, right, or that others have, and reflect on them, right? So become thoughtful about them, to look at them, right? I mean, are these, am I kind of literally, am I living the way I want to live, or is something missing, or whatever here? Are these really, and why do I have them? And again, at the end of that process, okay, you may come up with the same philosophy, right? You may realize I speak prose, right, the whole time, but or you may want to change things, and I think that's again what one of the importances I think of philosophy that one can do. Now, I mean, the other question, if I kind of understand it correctly, one, it's interesting at the time of Socrates, you have this really birth of questioning, right? And all around the globe, in a sense, you've got Socrates, you've got in the Christian tradition, Jesus, you've got Buddha, you've got others who are also all beginning to raise these questions uh, about the self, really, and about their world and about sort of their place in that world. Um, so we sort of talk about that kind of appeared, all these sort of what then become kind of perennial questions kind of emerged, and we still haven't answered, right? We're still searching for that. So that is kind of interesting, and sort of why it happens then, that's mysterious. Whether it's really happening now, that's the thing. When I retired, which is just in May, it was a very interesting time in which philosophy was both kind of at a low point, but also kind of at a new point. So there was a kind of, so many schools were dropping philosophy departments to add STEM courses. Other schools were beginning to add philosophy courses because these value questions, right, needed to be addressed. The fact that we had gotten into kind of an either STEM or the humanities, right? Now kind of recognizing what? No, there's not one without the other, or they need both, right? So
Thank you, Dr. Hulgren.
mhm.
I have a question here. I have about 2 to 3 questions. I'll try to
Okay.
pose it.
Are they multiple choice?
So,
Huh? Multiple choice questions? I love multiple choice questions.
yeah, yeah. Because it's a very interesting topic, especially for our group. Philosophy is one of the interest topic for us.
Good. Good.
So basically, what I understood from your talk is we have two kinds of philosophies, which is philosophy of my life, which I
Mhm.
have for myself,
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
which I get from my culture, my surroundings, my way of brought up, and
Mhm.
my education, all the things they impart some kind of philosophy in me. But there is another thing called philosophy, which is to be read, which is to be understand. Like it's as a subject. So I think there
Yeah.
is a lot of difference in these two things. But what
Mhm.
I understood is like by reading the philosophy as a subject, we come to know the our understanding of life, our understanding of experience, our understanding of knowledge, God, politics, all the things. We maybe that subject of philosophy maybe giving us a critical eye to
Mhm.
look into these many things. So here comes my question, like how as a student of philosophy, like I'm not related to philosophy as a subject
Mhm.
because I'm into medical field, but I want to know more about philosophy to get
Yeah.
more critical eye on my understanding of life.
Mhm.
So where to start as a not as a student of not a philosophy as a subject,
Mhm.
but from outsider, where I have to start to understand the philosophy, because what we are getting now is two kinds of
Mhm.
things. One, philosophy of a system, for example, say modern philosophy,
Yeah.
postmodern philosophy, something
Yeah.
like a method as a system. But as another a Greek philosophy, Western philosophy, Indian
Yeah.
philosophy. But whereas from personal wise, like philosophy of Bertrand Russell, philosophy of Slavoj
Yeah.
Zizek, or philosophy of Karl
Mhm.
Marx, all this. So
Mhm.
we are so much confused as a student. So as a seeker of knowledge, as you said, lover of wisdom. So we have always a doubt where we have to start, how we can understand the philosophy. Number one question. Number two
Yeah.
question is uh, whenever we try to understand some kind of philosophy through some books, we
Mhm.
come with lot of words which we do not understand basically. See, for example, ontology, epistemology, ethics. They say these all are the part of the philosophies. Like no, these are the subjects of the philosophy. So we get a lot of confusion here. So how to overcome as a student of as a person who is loving more about philosophy, how to overcome these many where beyond, like so many words we come across.
Yeah.
So these are the two questions which I wanted to pose to you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Let me just, okay, because there's so much there, and you're right. This notion of the critical eye. Gosh, there's so many different directions you go. Just a couple of quick, and I don't mean to be repeating, but one of the first things I think is to begin sort of separate maybe kind of having a philosophy from doing a philosophy. And so, and it's not just that, we sort of find ourselves already kind of having a very inchoate kind of philosophy, but at the same time, there are all those philosophies out there, right? You've got all these different schools of philosophy, right? So you have philosophy, right? But then philosophy is something that you do when you critically analyze those schools, okay? Greek philosophy, or you analyze analytic philosophy, or another sort of school, right? Or you're reading a one and you're kind of analyzing that. So there's kind of just between sort of having a philosophy sort of and kind of doing philosophy. And the doing philosophy sometimes can be pretty scary because very often it's done alone or you're doing it with others, like probably your group is doing, right? You're kind of working together on these issues and some of all of these sorts of questions. The other thing you mentioned about the school system, one of the things that has happened in the West is that there, for a while now, has been a lot of philosophy done with children. So bringing philosophy into the lower grades. We at Virginia Wesleyan, a long time ago, I did a summer philosophy course for middle school, what are now middle school students. Those are 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. And I did some for 5th and 6th graders where but this critical eye is something you just sort of start working with kids. So that, and in fact, I did a Zoom last fall with my one of my grandchildren in Connecticut. He was taking a course in philosophy. It's part of a gifted program, but doing a course in philosophy, and they were reading Plato. And was in the 8th grade. But basically what they're trying to do there is to help develop these powers of critical analysis, these powers of kind of beginning to think for yourself, or beginning to kind of reason in the sense of thinking about reasons for the things that you do. Okay. And so there's been much of that. And so begins by, taking, when I did the thing, I would read with the kids, the Lorax in the United States, again, about environmental issues. And the kids, love that, talking about, the Lorax and the Onceler and what this says about things that are going on in their own backyard, literally, in a thing about climate change and things like that. So that's beginning to change in schools, and schools are getting away from, at least the liberal arts colleges and universities are trying to get away from kind of teaching that's kind of the sage on the stage kind of thing. So we get back and work with problems, kind of more of a recognition that that most of the problems that we deal with, and I'm sure in your fields as well, are now what we now kind of call wicked problems, right? They're wicked. You just can't solve them with one tool, right? One discipline. You're already on the edges with what other people are doing. And so we have to team up, right? And go team kind of stuff. Or we just have to bring in these different perspectives in order to deal with these, kind of a more sort of systematic sort of point of view of these things. So that's getting back to this more holistic view that you see sort of early on that was, at the beginning of philosophy. So you find philosophers sort of dealing with that. And then I guess if you think about this plethora of all these philosophers and schools, and I'm going through that right now. I dismembered my office of some 55 years, right? I wish they had made me move more because I'd have fewer things, and I'd and set it up in all these boxes in my garage. And so I'm having to go through these papers and these books. Of course, I did so much of my work before we had, cyberspace. We knew about it, I guess. So I'm going through these. And so as I pick up these books, okay, I start reading them again. So I'm not getting anything done. Glad my door is shut. My wife doesn't hear all this. But because there's just so much out there. But again, it's just so fascinating. But again, it does, it just reminds me kind of that like our life, philosophy is not static. We're constantly becoming. And I think in our disciplines, we're constantly becoming a manager, constantly becoming a doctor, becoming a teacher, right? It's really not static. And so we're constantly, looking for or constantly reading more about. And so this search for wisdom is just that. It's a search, right? Aristotle at one point said, virtue was the key for the ancient Greeks. And he said, before one can say their life has been truly virtuous, right? Before you can really say, has your life been good or bad? He says, at any time you do it, you may be either on an upswing or a downswing, right? You may be up here and everything's great, and you may be down here and it's just nowhere to go. So he says you have to wait to the end of your life to see kind of, draw the line here through the ups and downs to sort of see what it's been like. That's at the end, right? Okay. So there is that sense, and Kierkegaard put it like this: the kind of the challenge here, which is why you have what a great group to have to be doing this, really. But Kierkegaard said, we live forwards, but we understand backwards. We live forwards, but understand backwards. And that's what we're doing here, right? I mean, we're going on, we're trying to catch up, trying to understand where we've been. Where I'm doing a lot of that now. I had to give, a talk, and I had to go back and look at my life at Weston. So gosh, it was, like painting a portrait of stumps, right? Things that just were kind of now over. But then I got to think about Kierkegaard. No, I'm talking about new twigs or branches or something are coming out here, new things that I need to think about. But I think that relates to as you look at other philosophies or philosophers, you're never going to be able to read all of them. I'm having that trouble. I can't read the ones in my garage now, that many. But we're living forwards, and when you look at these, you kind of look at them maybe as you do with when you start reading something, looking at something, you don't necessarily finish it because it may not be relevant to you at that time, right? I mean, so many things I've started, but I don't finish because I'll go back to them, but I never get back to them thinking on. But I'm thinking of here as a lot of as the ancients really thought of, especially the Stoics, which is really popular right now. I don't know that much about the Stoics, but that's really very popular now. Most of our students in high school and down are starting to hear a lot about the Stoics because, again, they're very angry, and the Stoics say, no, you don't want to be angry, calm, right? They're very worried, and the Stoics say, no, don't worry, what, me worry? No, you don't want to do that. But they kind of present kind of experiments in living in a way, but living in a particular time, a particular place. And so maybe look at some of these different philosophers and philosophies as, here's an experiment. Does that help me understand something going on in my life? And if it is, you may kind of incorporate it. I don't know if that kind of responds to what you're saying or not, but those are some things that come to mind.
Really surprised, like and middle schoolers have been exposed or do they?
Mhm.
It'll be interesting to see kind of questions they pose, like even as an adult, like, right? What is philosophy? Like, how do you understand? Like,
Yeah, they had them in Jasper in my son's class. They read Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And when I talk with them, they were very, very good. Part of what is going on here is that there have been a lot of discussions, and even in some school systems, it's interesting. It's almost like if you go back to, I mentioned Aristophanes in his writing about Socrates in the clouds, because one of his big criticisms there was that Socrates students were asking questions that their parents couldn't answer about things, right? Or that students were not simply imbibing, right, the beliefs and values of their parents. I sent them off to school, they come back, now, they're no longer believing the same things we are. And so there's something wrong with the school system. And you're kind of seeing that in a lot of these places, and it's kind of colliding a bit. But there is also this movement that has been going on in philosophy for children, which has really been trying to kind of recognize that the children, in one sense, aren't just little adults, but they also can begin to have that. I love that phrase, critical eye. And maybe that's what we need to start having them sort of develop, this critical eye. And as I said before, in a way, since I've been talking about this morning, I know I'm going back to it, but one of the things that made Plato such a great student is that he believed his teacher Socrates by what? Criticizing him, right? By not just picking up and doing what Socrates told him to do, in a sense, right? He went on and established a school. He said, look, Socrates went down and talked to these people kind of one-on-one. Look what happened to him. They killed him, right? He didn't influence enough people, right? He got a jury. He couldn't convince enough people in the jury. And so he got, I'm going to start a school, bring these students in, and I'm going to have them right here. And I'm going to, give more of them philosophy or something, whatever. But anyhow, but yeah, so there is this work that is being done more with now a lot of study that was done, early study that was done, and for a while I know California really had a required philosophy course in one of their grades, but they've discovered that there are literally sort of secondary effects that are very good that come from this. And most often it's these secondary effects that they sort of tout. That is, they've discovered on tests critical reading, right? Reading skills increase on these exams, on these, uniform exams for those students who have done work in philosophy, reading Plato and some other things. They've discussed that sort of critical thinking skills seem to go up by those students who have been in these classes. And so they suggest that, hey, these students are going to be able to raise their test scores by doing this, but that's not the main reason, hopefully, that they're doing that. But it is, like I say, we did a summer course. I did a Saturday morning class with students from our local school. And then we did, for a while, we did a little summer school for them, and they had a great time. They would, read some of again, we'd go back. One thing we did was go back and read things like the Lawrence, some of these fun kind of books they had as a child or read as a child, and look for these philosophical themes. They're really there, right? And raising questions these kids are raising, So anyhow, that's done. And so I would just say that there, and hopefully I think that's been a bright spot, sort of for philosophers to see some philosophy being introduced into high school as a regular course. But
Okay.
other things,
We have two questions in the Zoom chat, so I can go ahead and
would you please do that? I see. I'm really
or
bad.
if you read it like the second one, is altruism possible or
Okay.
all actions
Okay.
inherently
Okay.
selfish?
Or yeah, that's really a very good question. I remember one of the things when I first kind of came across that issue was there was a story about it was Abraham Lincoln supposedly was with somebody and they're riding along and somebody was harming an animal or something and they're arguing about this, whether altruism is possible or sort of all actions inherently selfish and done for your own pleasure. And this person jumps out of the coach and saves the pig or the animal or something, comes back and says, well, there was an altruistic act, Abraham. He's probably on a first name basis, right? And Abraham says, no, you did that because you wanted to do it. It was for your own good, not for the animals good or something like that. And I've always thought a little bit about that. My quick thought, and this would be a good thing for us to talk about, is that I think we sometimes confuse here in a sense when we talk about something like are all actions selfish? Okay, we got to recognize that we have actions, right? And among those actions are actions we call selfish. So there's a difference between actions and selfish actions, right? Selfish actions are a kind of action, but they're not necessarily all actions, right? So I think that's an important thing that I think about here, and that is that all people have interests. We all have interests, right? Okay, but not all interests, okay, are about ourselves. Some of our interests are altruistic. And so I sort of think of that as being now a choice here. Okay, you can have selfish interests or you can have altruistic interests. And now let's talk about why might it be better to have selfish interests or why might it be better to have altruistic interests? What might the difference be? So that's how I would begin to maybe look at that question. Any other thoughts about that? I don't know if that makes any sense. Maybe it does at this time of the night or this time of the morning. well, we can come back to that. Let's see, there's several things.
And there is one more question. It's
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's a real good question. Some of you are in the medical field, and as I one of the things that I leave a lot of things out that we jokingly in the West sort of think about, many of us really saved philosophy, was bioethics, was medical ethics, were all these advances that were going on in medical technology and in medicine in the 60s, 70s that were questions that were not technical scientific questions, right? But they were brought about by technical science. Some of the first questions in the West were out in Seattle, recall with the development of dialysis machines, right? And Scribner, the developer, come back with these machines. This was this great boon. Lives were now going to be saved, but what? There weren't very many of them. There weren't very many of them. And they had to decide what? Who lives, who decides, and even really who dies, right? And Scribner, bless his heart, sort of recognized that to make these decisions as to who gets put on a machine, yeah, there's some criteria that's scientific, that's medical, right? But that didn't solve the question. It was a value question, right? Of who ought to get this, okay, and why. And so he recognized that you needed first of all, he recognized this needed to be made by a committee, by others, not just the people who had invented or the people who were working with this. And he felt that it needed to be a societal question, a human question, and so he brought together of different folk from different disciplines, different walks of life, kind of a thing. Unfortunately, it became known as the God Committee. And in the 60s, this great article in Life magazine, a very popular magazine at the time, which kind of talked about this choice, this new development, and this beginning of these ethical questions, which showed this committee in shadows, this very gothic kind of view of these poor people trying to decide, literally, who lives and who dies. But the point here is a recognition there that here were questions that technicians and nurses and the physicians really weren't prepared to answer, right? Questions about, and again, it's the same time when you find, at least in the West, this real change in the notion of the physician-patient relationship, right? Because again, and you've got the civil rights movement, you've got the consumer rights movement going on in the United States, people wanting to what? Be autonomous, right? People wanting their autonomy respected, people wanting to decide what happens to their own bodies, right? And so looking to medicine to point out what are the possibilities, right? But they wanted to make that decision. Now I've got my youngest son is a physician, nurse medicine in New York, and I know this creates all sorts of problems, especially all these ads on TV about this drug and that. But the question here became, this technological question became, and this is what again the turn to philosophy meant, was again, science, technology could tell us what we can do, right? And science is very important, right? But science can sort of tell us, it can tell us sort of what has been in the case in the past. It can sort of tell us what is the case now. It can tell us how things are likely to be in the future, okay? But again, science can tell us what we can do, right? But ethics, philosophy is what? It's concerned with the question, what ought we to do? Okay, so, okay, what of what we can do ought we to do? Can do all these things. Again, and again, there's also a question, who decides? The patient, the physician, okay? But the question, so what happens with is this field of bioethics, and then it opens into many other fields as well, is this recognition of the importance of this value dimension, right? And so that's why, again, I got involved with down at our local children's hospital and at the medical school because of these sort of ethical questions that began to emerge from the practice of medicine. And you found more and more kind of physicians and this is obviously especially in Catholic hospitals and some of the denominational hospitals, sort of recognizing that medicine was a moral enterprise. Again, people went into medicine for what? The good of the patient. Good, right? It's not a scientific term. Efficient, that's a scientific term, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean good, right? And so suddenly this value dimension opens in so many disciplines and so many fields. And that's why I kind of shared that quote from Stephen Toulmin, because maybe it saved my job and kept me where I am with dealing again with some of those questions, and not just having to work with STEM questions as a solo kind of gig. I don't know if that helps the question or not. Yeah. And limits to its reach. Yeah. Yeah. There's limits to everything, right? And that's, what makes it so tough, right? I mean, it's a limit to being a human. But anyhow, I do think you do see, and especially now in our medical schools, now we have really in the courses, we do have courses in research ethics, courses in medical ethics. At the local hospital I searched on with, was on a conflict of interest committee with him down there, and I in a committee on the children's hospital, an ethics committee, and then one at Centera, our other hospital, and then do some work at the medical school with these sorts of things. So that's kind of kept me in business and helped me bring things back to the class to share with my students, because, again, they're very young, they have very limited experience, to try to get them to think about some of these things, really, when they have the luxury of thinking about them. And not, when you suddenly get, whammed by an issue, kind of the starting gun goes off, and boy, you're under the gun as to what you need to do.
That's a good point. Luxury, when they have luxury of thinking, probably as they grow older and then into their professions, they don't have luxury of thinking, right?
No. I had and I just want to share this because it raised to kind of the other question here as well. One of the best experiences I had, and that was down at EVMS. I got a chance to work with Dr. Howard Jones, and he and his wife had brought the first in vitro fertilization birth in the United States. It was the second in the United States. And he retired at Johns Hopkins, right? Then he comes down here and does this. And he was very much interested in these questions, in part because of the societal view of then, and unfortunately it reverberating here today, of this issue of in vitro fertilization, and again, trying to deal with the religious questions, the moral questions, the ethical questions, and not just the scientific questions. They could not be pulled apart. And even to do science, he had to get the permission of his school, of his community, that sort of a thing. But and when he formed the Jones Institute, he would have monthly meetings over ethics and the ethical issues they faced in the institute, but also kind of an education in kind of this. But when we would talk, he would always sort of say, Larry, he said, what I need, and I understand, he says, you're an academic. What I need is not sort of a two-handed ethicist. I need a one-handed ethicist. Because you always say, well, on the one hand, you can do this, or on the other hand, you can do that. He says, I'm busy. I just need one hand. kind of tell me what to do here. And that is that problem of the professions but why it's important then to spend, when you can, the time, dealing about these issues, so you can go into them with some other tools in your toolbox, right? Maybe the tool of philosophy, the tool of ethics, along with some of the research tools or whatever that you're kind of working with. So you've kind of also thought about them, or you have some idea of how to think about them. Okay, so you maybe think about them in terms of virtues. What does a good doctor do, right, with a patient? Or in terms of certain key moral and ethical principles. In medicine in the United States, a lot of ethics committee, a lot of professionals, really kind of fall back on kind of a principlist approach, looking at sort of the key ethical principles of autonomy, right? Patient autonomy is really very central in the West in general and in our society as well. Principles of do no harm, going back to Hippocrates, right? Not in the oath, but in the writings where he sort of says, do good by your patient, but at least do no harm. So this notion of harm, this notion of beneficence, doing good. And then, of course, what's really important today, at least in our society, is this notion of justice, fairness, right? And so again, in terms of those kinds of ethical values, approach those situations in terms of trying to figure out, get that one hand up so you know kind of what to do. Let's see, there's some other messages here. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, good. Those. Okay. Yeah, emotions and rational thinking. Good question. They're there and they need to be there. That's a good, very, very good question, because we sometimes, so many discussions about so many topics. When I first got involved, for example, with some of the people in medical ethics, that was a little bit more awareness there, not that much. The real question was not an ethical question; it was a legal question. Okay, and that was really not. It was, different kinds of questions, and we need to have different tools to work with these different kind of questions. That's, I guess, the bottom line here. But so a lot of the questions that people thought were really legal questions. What can I do so I don't get sued? Well, there's nothing you can do. People can sue you about anything and everything in this society culture, right? But you can what? Make sure you don't win. They don't win. That you've done good. You've done any sort of a thing. So that becomes sort of very, 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 very important. And other people also sort of thought these as questions that would go, well, they're really questions related to legal questions. They're questions about, the rules and regulations. And they become questions literally about ethics. But again, in all of these questions, emotions are there and need to be there, right? Now, there's a whole, someone before had been mentioned, again, talk about different kinds of philosophies and how they might rate different fields. Developed in the West was another sort of whole philosophy related to medical ethics, bioethics in particular, but then a notion of sort of an ethics of care, making that central to our life a virtuous life, or making that central to how we're going to solve these questions that we have here, and that's where these emotions sort of come in, right? And that's why when you talk about this kind of search for wisdom, or with Socrates searching with others, right? The way you do it is very important, isn't it? I remember when this sort of thing came out, chat or emails came out, everybody was mad at everybody else, right? Because you didn't see people's emotions. You didn't see their expressions, right? You didn't have the context in front of you. And so you'd write a very simple email and you'd lose a friend for life kind of thing over that. Not really, but it was that kind of a thing. And it shows how to bring those things have to be brought back in. And especially, maybe I would say today, and I'm really getting out of my elements here, but again, we talk about these so-called wicked problems, right? We talk about you've got to have more tools in your toolbox, right? That you've got to bring in a team to do this, right? And it's not a team that just does this, and this all around. It's got to gel. It's got to merge, right? It's got these things are overlapping problems. We got to work. The word is together here, right? Work together. Then those emotions becomes very, very, very important. And can't figure the fellow's name, but did all this work and study called emotional intelligence. Just as we need that logical intelligence, right? That's important. We also need this emotional intelligence. And so we just sort of can't just, we talk about kind of retreat back to our own sort of discipline, our own little, proverbial kind of shelter here, a philosophy or whatever. It's got to be something else that's done. Okay. Oh, I mentioned these 4 pillars of medical ethics that come out of the work of, excuse me, James Childress and Howard Beecham. They are Howard James Beecham is a theologian, a religious professor. He's now at UVA. Uh, uh, Thomas Beecham was a philosopher. He's been at Georgetown for a long time. And what's interesting is that Jim Childress worked out of a kind of a deontological religious position, right? Looking more at virtues, looking more at the intrinsic value of things, looking more at the nature of our decisions. Um, Beecham was a utilitarian, looking at consequences, results, being more pragmatic. But the two of them got together and started to talk and started to do a lot of studying together. And they went back and they looked at, again, they said they looked at different traditions, not just traditions in the West. They look at different sort of cultural kind of ethics. And they said that there are a lot of things, but there were sort of four key ethical principles that you could find in all of these traditions. Okay. And these were the four. One was this respect for the person, this principle of autonomy. A second one was this notion of do no harm. Okay. Do no harm, kind of non-maleficence, non-maleficence. The third principle that they sort of found, it was kind of common here, was this notion of beneficence, to do good. Right? That's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to improve things, make things better. Then the fourth principle was the principle of justice. You could talk about distributive justice, or you could talk about retributive justice, social justice, all those sorts of things. And so that became very, very popular in the medical field. Okay. Now, obviously, these, we talked about these collisions earlier. These principles sort of collide. So that you've got to sort of decide, for example, the Hippocratic Oath, or what happened in Seattle with the hemodialysis machines, or what happens, when someone says this is so, kind of take me off these machines. This is too much loss of dignity or too much suffering, right? Principle of harm versus and maybe autonomy versus you're wanting to do good. You can save that life. Well, what about the quality of life? And so you still have to make those sort of judgments, and they become contextual, right? Because it's going to depend upon, again, the relationship between you and the other, or that situation. But those are the four, and you can look up their book where they brought this out is like in its 6th or 7th or 8th different edition. Has been very popular. It's not the only way of doing ethics in medicine in particular, or some of the other STEM fields, but it's in the West have been very, very popular.
Interesting that you spoke a lot of things about medical ethics and then the role of philosophy there. But I think we are now into an age where we have separated for the first time the ethics and human intelligence in the form of introducing artificial intelligence. So do you think that there is, most of these algorithms, I think, on which the world is already running, half by half. And I don't think they have any sort of principles of ethics or.
No, that's a great question. I might just as a commercial here, Eastern Virginia Medical School, right? And EVMS is now a part of Old Dominion University, right? So that's really sort of expanded. So and Reddy now is over there as well. It's interesting you mentioned that, because retiring is bittersweet for a lot of reasons. One of them is just that is at this time. It's sweet that I don't have to worry, at least in the classroom, about cheating. I mean, when in academia, as you know, the only thing we really thought about, unfortunately, about AI was cheating, and so we spent all this time arguing about that, never really getting to what you're talking about, which are the real issues here. And so, in a way, I just really feel good in writing up my syllabus for this year, which I didn't have to do. I didn't have to get into these issues, but the bitterness comes in that these are really key philosophical issues, right? Now, they've been around for a long time. I was thinking about that. I was over talking to some students we have an ethics club, and we participate in an ethics bowl. We're in a system with some other private liberal arts universities and colleges in the state, also some kind of nationally. I don't know what I'm doing that for, but anyhow, sorry, nationally. And they have what they call ethics bowls. And so students get together and they give them an ethical issue, and then they sort of debate this issue. And this year's question was artificial intelligence of AI. And so when I'm talking, and I know so little about it, and I had to kind of spend most of my time sort of apologizing. But in a way, if I had stayed, I would be working right now and trying to address these challenges and put a course in, because we really need that course, because we're starting to discover again so many ethical issues, right? I mean, and again, this is my ignorance, but you think of all these logarithms or how these machines have been, all this information put in, information, right? No wisdom, but information, okay? And so they simply give out what was put in. Well, a lot of unjust kind of stuff was put in there, right? And so that's kind of going to be an issue here. And I was thinking, I can remember that this issue of artificial intelligence, we think of Frankenstein, right? That became one of the words we initially used. You can go back even further into some of the early Greek, some of the early Jewish texts. They had this creature, the golem, that they made, I think out of mud and everything, that had human intelligence, and so it goes way back. And in fact, and you might know more about this than I did, but when I started at Wesleyan, just the beginning of the little computers, the turtle, little logic for the turtle and things like that you could learn. And I remember the time there was a computer scientist at I think it was MIT, who had just come up with a program called LISA. Have you ever heard of LISA? And he kind of using these Rogerian principles of psychotherapy. Okay, he developed this program that people could go and ask questions, and the computer would ask questions back. And he talks about this thing. He worked on this. He thought it was really pretty neat that this computer helped you. And his secretary, he would type all this up to put on the note. They'd run through the cards and stuff like that. He said she started working with Liza as her therapist, and he said she would close the office door for time with Eliza. And he said she knew it was a machine. She knew what was going on, but she did this. And he was raising those same sort of questions about that. Well, this was a machine, wasn't it? And anyhow, but you're so right. Have you thought of any? Have you started to discuss this over at Old Dominion at all, or?
I don't think. I mean, there are a lot of few questions are coming up. Like, for example, how to introduce ethical code writing. Like, because these most of the algorithms are written by these code writers who are.
They can write the codes now, right? Too, yeah.
So there is this. I think new development is happening. That's what I heard, but I don't know who will guide them. Like, where.
Well, isn't that it? Yeah. And the question, it's a who. Right? I think important is a who. Yeah, it's a who. I've got a sister-in-law who's over at the University of Illinois, and she's a biologist. But they've got the computer department, the biology department, the math department, all into this organic machines, trying to work on organic machines. So not just which is, I think, going to probably be another whole level to some of these questions. But these are indeed, you're right. What is human? Okay. And what does that mean? What does it mean to say a machine is not human? Or even what is artificial intelligence?
Right.
Is what is natural intelligence, I guess, kind of comes up too. Or is there any meaningful distinction anymore? Yeah.
So, I mean, if you look at, like, you subtract the emotions and then filter it out the intelligence part alone, I think that will become artificial. So that's where now we are heading into kind of, emotionless intelligence that really,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, right, the question is, Freud used to talk about the use of all these sort of artificial tools. Humans were these technical, all these artificial tools. And is this just a tool or? Yeah. Well, thank you all so very, very much. What a great group you must have to have lasted this long with me, either this evening, either this morning, but to get a chance to get together from so many wonderful areas to talk about these things.
Dr. Hultgren, we have one more question. Maybe I'll make
okay.
this one as a final one. Is
Is
free will an illusion?
Well, I'll tell you what, if I turn off my computer, okay, will that just be an illusion, right? Will you still stay? Saying it's only an illusion. Don't worry. He's really there, or he'll really come back. That's another a delightful question, isn't it? And you know, maybe in some ways the very fact that we raised that question, right, suggests that it isn't. But again, you know, I remember William James was reading one time. He gave a lecture at Harvard, the psychologist and philosopher, and all this philosophy stuff. And he said, finally, one lady after his grant said, you know, she said, you've talked about the world, which is, I really think that the world sits on the back of a turtle. Yeah. Maybe some Native American law, some other places, the sits on the back of a turtle. And James said, well, I said, I can appreciate that. I can maybe see why you see it, but you know, what does that turtle stand on? And she said, well, stands on another turtle. Yeah. Well, James said, what does that turtle stand on? And she said, another turtle. And then she said, stop. She said, it's going to be turtles all the way. So, and maybe this is that free will is that kind of a question. It's going to be standing, you know, we're just never going to finish where it finally starts. But maybe the very fact that it starts suggests that might be a little different. That is a great, a great question. And you mentioned earlier, that's what really fascinated in a way some of these students in 8th grade about Plato's allegory of the cave, right? Because Plato's allegory of the cave starts off with these prisoners, right? It's like being in a movie theater. These prisoners chained in a cage, seeing only these shadows in front of them, right? All they see is literally what? Well, the TV or their little screens, you know, that's all they're seeing, right? And so the question is there more than that? Or is there something behind that? So that notion of this, you know, of this all being an illusion, free will, or my being here, you being here, cyberspace, whatever. Yeah. So no, I haven't figured that out. And if you do, maybe we can meet again and decide. Well, and thank you so very, very much. And I do appreciate your time. And I want to thank Reddy for inviting me. And this has really been great. So I understand, I guess you have a kind of a little meeting to do, so I'll let you do that. But thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Hultgren.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Sorry about the halo that was there.
Yeah, that's fine. I think we will again request you back if you kind enough to spare us.
Oh, I would love to do that, and you know, maybe something that I could give you some words of wisdom or something on instead of just questioning the question. But I would truly enjoy coming back and getting a chance to talk with you all again. So please keep that in mind. I would really enjoy doing that. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.